The reflection in the polished surface of the bar wasn't his own. It was a distorted, funhouse version of a man he barely recognized, a man whose smile was stretched a little too tight, whose shoulders were hunched in a permanent question mark. He was watching her. Of course, he was watching her. Her name was Maya, and she was the kind of person who didn't just walk into a room. She was the light that the room turned to face. Her laugh wasn't just a sound. It was a melody that seemed to pull all the scattered notes of the evening into a perfect harmony. And he, Liam, was just a part of the background noise, a muffled beat in the grand symphony of her existence. He had spent the last 3 weeks, a total of 21 sleepless nights and a small fortune in ethically sourced, single-origin coffee, crafting the perfect presentation for her. She had mentioned in a throwaway comment at the office water cooler that she was struggling with a pitch for a new client, a big one, the kind that could change a career. She'd sighed, running a hand through her auburn hair, and said, "I just can't get the visuals right." Liam was a graphic designer. Not just a graphic designer, but an artist, a visual storyteller. And his heart, a foolish, traitorous organ, had seized upon her words as a call to arms. So he'd worked. He hadn't just done what she asked. He had poured his soul into it. He researched the client until he knew their brand history better than their own marketing team. He created 3 distinct visual concepts, each with a full mock-up, a detailed style guide, and an animated storyboard. He had done the work of an entire creative agency, fueled by the desperate, unspoken hope that this gesture, this monumental offering of his talent and time, would finally make her see him. Not just as Liam, the quiet guy from the 3rd floor, but as Liam, the one who understood, the one who could make her vision come to life, the one who mattered. He'd sent it to her that morning, a simple email with a link. "Just some ideas I was playing around with, hope it helps." The casualness of the words felt like a lie, a betrayal of the sheer magnitude of his effort. All day, his phone had felt like a dead weight in his pocket. No reply. Not a text, not an email, not even a quick message on the company chat. Just silence. And now here they were, at the same company happy hour, and she was standing across the room holding a glass of wine, her head tilted back in that way that made her throat look so elegant, laughing at something another man was saying. That man was Marcus. Marcus, who didn't craft, he commanded. Marcus, who walked with a certainty that Liam could only dream of, whose voice cut through the chatter of a room with effortless authority. Marcus hadn't spent 3 weeks on her project. Liam was fairly certain Marcus barely knew what the project was, but he had her attention. He had all of it. Liam took a sip of his lukewarm beer, the taste as bitter as the feeling curdling in his stomach. He felt a familiar, chilling sensation creep over him. It was the feeling of invisibility. It wasn't a loud, dramatic vanishing act. It was a slow fade, a quiet erosion of his own presence until he was nothing more than a ghost at the feast, watching the living enjoy the warmth and light. He saw her phone light up in her hand. She glanced at it, a flicker of a smile on her lips. For a heart-stopping second he thought, "She's seen my email. She's going to come over. She's going to thank me." But she didn't. She typed a quick reply and slid the phone back into her purse, her attention never once leaving Marcus's face. The ache in Liam's chest wasn't just disappointment. It was a profound, hollowing sense of worthlessness. The story he had told himself, the one where his effort would be the key that unlocked her affection, was a fantasy. He had offered up his most valuable assets, his time, his talent, his energy, and it hadn't even registered. It was like tossing a diamond into the ocean. The value was there, but it was lost in the vast, indifferent depths. He wasn't just invisible, he was irrelevant. The conversation in his own head was a screaming match. "Why did you do it?" One voice sneered. "You knew this would happen. You always overextend, you always give too much, and you always end up with nothing." "But it was a good thing to do," another, weaker voice pleaded. "I was helping, I was being kind." The sneering voice laughed. "Kindness is what you call it. Desperation is what it is. You weren't being kind, you were being tactical. You were trying to barter your skills for her attention. You were trying to buy her respect. And look where it got you. She's not even looking in your direction. She's captivated by the one person in the room who probably wouldn't lift a finger for her unless it directly benefited him. And that was the truth, wasn't it? The brutal, ugly, undeniable truth. Marcus had a gravitational pull, a field of energy around him that was built on an entirely different principle. It wasn't built on service or sacrifice. It was built on self. He seemed to carry his own validation around with him, a self-contained power source that didn't require external charging. He wasn't looking around the room, gauging reactions, hoping for a smile or a nod of approval. He was the reaction. He was the approval. And people, Maya included, were drawn to that like moths to a flame. Liam felt a sudden, suffocating need to leave, to be anywhere else, to escape the suffocating evidence of his own failure. He turned to place his empty glass on the bar, and his eyes met the bartender's. The man was older, with lines around his eyes that spoke of 1,000 late nights watching dramas like this unfold. He gave Liam a small, almost imperceptible nod, a look that wasn't pity but a strange sort of recognition. It was a look that said, "I see you. I see what you're doing, and I see that it's killing you." In that silent, fleeting exchange, Liam felt a crack appear in the foundation of his worldview. The thought that entered his mind was not his own. It felt ancient, a piece of wisdom transmitted across the polished wood of the bar. The most attractive person in any room isn't the one trying the hardest to be noticed. It's the one who doesn't need to be. That single thought was a spark in the suffocating darkness of his insecurity. It didn't fix anything, but it illuminated everything. His frantic efforts, his people-pleasing, his desperate need for Maya's approval. It was all a frantic chase, a noisy, clumsy attempt to force his worth into her line of sight. He was acting like a salesman, desperately trying to convince a customer of his product's value. Marcus, on the other hand, wasn't selling anything. He was simply being. He was the art gallery, and you could either admire the art or walk away. The value of the art didn't change based on the viewer's opinion. Liam walked out of the bar that night not with a solution, but with a question that echoed with every step he took on the cold pavement. What if he stopped selling? What if he stopped trying to prove his value and just decided he had it? What would happen if he took all the energy he poured into winning the approval of others and poured it back into himself? It was a terrifying thought, because his entire social strategy was built on external validation. To abandon it felt like stepping off a cliff without knowing if there was water below. But as he looked up at the vast, indifferent sky, peppered with stars that shone without asking for permission, he realized he had already hit the bottom. He was already drowning in the consequences of his current path. The only way out was up. And the first step was to stop begging to be seen, and to start, for the first time in his life, to truly see himself. The next morning, the world felt different. The air in his apartment seemed to hum with the frequency of his newfound, fragile resolution. Usually, his first act of the day was to check his phone, a ritual of hope and dread, searching for that little dopamine hit of a message, a notification, a sign that he was remembered. Today, he left it on the nightstand. Instead, he walked to the window and watched the city wake up. He had lived in this apartment for 3 years, but he had never really noticed the way the early morning sun caught the edges of the buildings across the street, painting them in gold. He had always been too busy looking at a screen, at the curated lives of others, at the digital void he was trying to fill with his own worth. He made coffee, but he didn't gulp it down while scrolling through emails. He sat at his small kitchen table and simply drank it. He noticed the warmth of the mug in his hands, the bitter, rich aroma, the way the steam danced in the morning light. It was a small act, almost laughably insignificant, but it felt revolutionary. It was an act of being present in his own life, not just a spectator in someone else's. This was the beginning of his experiment. The hypothesis: self-respect was not a feeling you received from others. It was an action you took for yourself. And the first action was to reclaim his focus. All the mental real estate he had rented out to Maya, to his boss, to the endless parade of people whose opinions he craved. He was slowly, deliberately evicting them. First test came sooner than he expected. An email from his boss sent at 6:45 a.m. "Liam, need you to jump on this. The Miller account is on fire. Need a full redesign of their landing page by noon. It's a mess." Liam's stomach tightened. This was a classic fire drill. It wasn't his account. It was a mess because of poor planning from another department. And the noon deadline was impossible, not if he wanted to do quality work. The old Liam would have responded in a heartbeat. On it, no problem. He would have canceled his morning, skipped lunch, and delivered a rushed, caffeine-fueled design that would have been good enough. He would have been the hero, the reliable one, the team player. And he would have felt a surge of validation, followed by a slow, simmering resentment that he was, once again, the designated fixer of other people's emergencies. He stared at the email, his heart pounding. The desire to please, to be seen as indispensable, was a powerful current, pulling him toward the familiar path. But the bartender's knowing gaze, the cold emptiness of the previous night, held him back. He remembered the feeling of being irrelevant. Being the hero had never made him feel truly valued. It had only made him useful. And usefulness is not the same as respect. He took a deep breath and began to type a different kind of reply. "Good morning. I can definitely help with the Miller account. To ensure I deliver the best possible quality, a noon deadline isn't feasible alongside my existing priorities. I can clear my afternoon and have a first draft to you by 4 p.m. This will allow for a thoughtful and effective redesign. Let me know if that works." He read the email over and over. It felt alien. It was polite, professional, but it was also a boundary. It wasn't a no, but it was a no, not on your unreasonable terms. It was a statement that his time, his energy, and the quality of his work had value, a value that he himself was setting, not waiting for others to determine. His finger hovered over the send button. This was the cliff's edge. What if his boss got angry? What if he was seen as not being a team player? The fear was a cold knot in his gut. But then he thought of Maya and Marcus. Marcus would have never accepted the noon deadline. He would have likely delegated it or simply stated it was impossible. He operated from a place of assumed value. Liam was trying to build his. He clicked send. The silence that followed was deafening. He felt a wave of panic. He had made a mistake. He should have just said yes. It was easier to just say yes. He forced himself to get up from the computer. He was not going to sit there and stare at his inbox, waiting for judgment. He was going to stick to his morning routine. He was going to honor the commitment he had made to himself. He went to the gym. It was something he always meant to do, but something he often skipped in favor of more important things, like starting work early or, if he was honest, endlessly rereading old text message chains, looking for clues to someone's affection. As he ran on the treadmill, he felt the anxiety begin to burn away, replaced by a clean, sharp focus. He wasn't running to punish his body or to achieve some aesthetic ideal. He was running because it was an act of investment in himself. He was tending to the only machine he would ever truly own. He was choosing his own well-being over the frantic, imagined demands of others. When he returned to his apartment, drenched in sweat and feeling a sense of grounded clarity he hadn't felt in years, there was a reply in his inbox, from his boss. He opened it with trepidation. 4 p.m. works. Thanks, Liam. That was it. No anger, no reprimand. Just a simple, professional acceptance. Liam stared at the two words, 4 p.m. works. The world hadn't ended. He hadn't been fired. He had stated his needs, protected his professional standards, and it had been respected. It was a revelation. He had spent years believing that his value was in his immediate, unconditional compliance. He had made himself infinitely available, thinking it made him indispensable. Now, he was starting to see that the opposite might be true. Scarcity creates value. By putting a boundary around his time and energy, he had inadvertently increased their perceived worth. People don't value what is always available for free. They value what they have to respect the terms of. It was a small victory, but it felt like a seismic shift in his understanding of the world. Later that day, as he was deeply focused on the Miller redesign, his phone buzzed. It was a text from Maya. His heart did a familiar leap, a Pavlovian response he now recognized with a sense of clinical detachment. "Hey, oh my God, I just opened your email. The designs are absolutely incredible. You're a lifesaver. Can you talk for a few mins? Need to walk you through a couple of tiny tweaks." The old Liam would have dropped everything. The Miller account would have been forgotten. He would have answered the call with a breathless, "Of course, whatever you need." He would have been so high on the validation of her praise that he would have agreed to anything. But the new Liam, the Liam who had just set a successful boundary with his own boss, hesitated. He looked at the praise. "You're a lifesaver." It was the same old pattern. His value was being framed in terms of his usefulness to her. He had saved her. He was a utility. And now she needed a few tiny tweaks. A phrase he knew from experience could mean anything from changing a font color to a complete conceptual overhaul. He remembered his resolution. He was reclaiming his focus. He was in the middle of a priority task that he had committed to. To drop it for her would be to disrespect his commitment to his boss and, more importantly, to himself. It would be a declaration that her whim was more important than his word. With a sense of calm that surprised him, he typed a reply. "Hey Maya, so glad you liked them. I'm deep in a priority project until 4 p.m. today, but I'm free for 15 minutes after that if you want to chat." He sent it before he could second-guess himself. A part of him was screaming, "She's going to think you're blowing her off. She finally noticed you and you're shutting her down. This is your chance." But a quieter, deeper voice whispered, "This isn't shutting her down. This is teaching her how to interact with you. It's showing her that your time is structured and valuable, not an open resource for her to tap into at will." The reply came almost instantly. "Okay, 4:15 works. Talk then." Again, no drama, no anger, just an acceptance of the terms he had set. It was bewildering. For years, he had operated under the assumption that setting boundaries would lead to conflict and rejection. He had contorted himself into knots to avoid ever saying anything that could be perceived as a no. Yet in the span of a single day, he had set two clear boundaries with two important people in his life, and the result wasn't rejection, it was respect. They hadn't argued. They had simply adjusted. It was as if he had been speaking a foreign language of supplication his entire life, and he was just now discovering that everyone else understood the simple, direct language of self-respect. He turned his phone over, silenced the notifications, and went back to his work. For the first time, he felt a sense of control not over others but over himself. He was the one directing his attention, his most precious resource. And in that quiet, focused space, a new feeling began to bloom, one he hadn't felt in a very long time. It wasn't the fleeting high of external validation. It was the solid, unshakable feeling of self-worth. He was building his own internal power source, and he was starting to understand that this was the quiet energy that truly captivated, the silent confidence that turned heads, the deep, resonant frequency of a person who knew their own value without needing anyone else to validate it. The 4:15 p.m. call with Maya was a masterclass in his own transformation. When he answered, he wasn't the eager, slightly breathless supplicant he would have been just 24 hours earlier. He was calm, centered, and professional. "Hi Maya, you have me for 15 minutes, he said, not as a threat, but as a simple statement of fact. It framed the conversation immediately. This was not an open-ended, hour-long session where she could pick his brain and drain his creative energy. This was a focused, professional meeting. She seemed to pick up on the shift in his energy. She was more prepared, more concise. She had her tiny tweaks listed out, and to his surprise they were, in fact, tiny. In the past, such conversations would often devolve into her brainstorming out loud while he scrambled to keep up, a dynamic that left him feeling more like a stenographer than a creative peer. But today, because he had framed the interaction with a clear boundary, she treated his time as the valuable resource it was. "This is brilliant, Liam, seriously," she said as they were wrapping up. "I don't know how I would have figured this out without you." The compliment landed differently this time. Before, "I couldn't have done it without you," would have been a direct injection of validation into his veins, a temporary fix for his chronic self-doubt. It would have made him feel powerful because it made him feel necessary to her. Now he heard it for what it was, a statement of her experience, not a definition of his worth. "I was happy to help," he replied, his tone warm but even. "Let me know what the client thinks." He didn't offer to do more work. He didn't ask if she needed anything else. He didn't try to extend the call or leverage the moment into a more personal conversation. He had delivered his value and the transaction was complete. They hung up at 4:29 p.m. He had held the boundary. This became his new operating system. The principle was simple: invest in the assets that belonged to him and set clear terms for how others could interact with them. His assets were his time, his energy, his talent, and his attention. For years, he had given them away freely, hoping for a return on investment in the form of affection or approval. Now, he was managing them like a wise portfolio manager. He started leaving the office at 5:30 p.m. every day. Not because he was lazy, but because he had decided his evenings belonged to him. They were for the gym, for reading, for working on his own personal art projects, a series of digital paintings he had dreamed of creating for years but never had the energy for. He was discovering that the energy was always there. It was just being siphoned off by his constant attempts to manage other people's perceptions of him. He stopped answering emails after work hours. He put his phone on silent for large chunks of the day to cultivate deep, uninterrupted focus. These weren't acts of defiance. They were acts of self-preservation. He was building a fortress around his own well-being, not to keep people out, but to create a space where he could flourish from the inside. The changes in the office were subtle at first. People stopped dropping emergency projects on his desk at 4:45 p.m. because they knew he wouldn't do them. Instead, they started coming to him earlier in the day with more organized requests. They were learning to respect his time because he was demonstrating that he respected it himself. They started treating him less like a creative vending machine and more like a respected expert. His opinions in meetings seemed to carry more weight, even though he wasn't speaking any louder. There was a new stillness about him, a lack of neediness that was quietly magnetic. He wasn't leaning into conversations, desperate to be heard. He was leaning back, creating a space for others to lean in. His relationship with Maya shifted too. Because he was no longer orbiting her, she started to notice him. One afternoon, she stopped by his desk. "Hey, what are you working on?" she asked, a genuine curiosity in her eyes. The old Liam would have fumbled, minimized his work, and immediately turned the conversation back to her. The new Liam smiled. "A personal project," he said, and for the first time he didn't feel the need to elaborate or justify it. The statement was enough. It implied a world of his own, a life and passions that existed entirely outside the context of his work or his usefulness to her. Her interest was piqued. "Oh, anything you can show me?" she asked. He considered it for a moment. He wasn't hiding it, but he also felt no compulsion to perform for her. "Maybe when it's ready," he said with a friendly but non-committal smile. He then turned his attention back to his screen, a clear but polite signal that the conversation was over. He wasn't being rude. He was simply honoring his own focus. He felt a pang of the old fear, "She'll think I'm arrogant," but it was quickly replaced by a sense of calm integrity. He was not being arrogant. He was being authentic. He was not going to interrupt his own creative flow just to satisfy her fleeting curiosity. This small act of self-possession was more powerful than any grand gesture he had ever made. He was communicating without words that his inner world was a priority. It was a private, valuable space, and access to it was not freely given. It was earned. A few days later, Marcus, the man who had been the unwitting catalyst for his transformation, stopped him in the hallway. "Liam," he said, his voice holding a new tone. It wasn't the dismissive air he usually had. It was a note of genuine inquiry. "Heard you did some great work on the Miller account. My team was impressed with the turnaround and the quality." "Thanks, Marcus," Liam replied, meeting his gaze directly. He didn't feel the usual intimidation. He was no longer comparing himself to Marcus. He was operating on his own terms, running his own race. It was a good challenge. "We're starting a new initiative next month, a big one," Marcus continued, "and we need a strong visual lead. Your name came up. Would you be interested in discussing it?" Liam felt a genuine shock. He hadn't been campaigning for a promotion. He hadn't been networking or trying to get noticed by the right people. He had been doing the opposite. He had been focusing inward, protecting his energy, and concentrating on the quality of his own work. And yet, the recognition he had so desperately chased was now seeking him out. The irony was so thick he could taste it. When he had been desperate for validation, it had eluded him. Now that he was generating his own, it was being offered to him freely. "I'd be happy to hear more about it," Liam said, his voice steady. "Send me the brief and I'll take a look." He had just been offered the biggest opportunity of his career, and his response was not a fawning, grateful yes, but a calm, professional "send me the brief." He was evaluating the opportunity, not begging for it. He was an equal at the negotiating table, not a supplicant hoping for scraps. As he walked away, he realized the profound truth of what was happening. Attraction, respect, and influence are not things you can chase. They are not rewards you earn for good behavior or for sacrificing yourself. They are the natural byproducts of self-respect. When you treat yourself as valuable, the world around you begins to reflect that valuation back to you. It's a quiet, subtle shift in the energy you emit. You stop broadcasting a frequency of neediness and start emitting a frequency of wholeness. People don't know why they are drawn to it, they just know that they are. They feel the calm, the centeredness, the lack of a hidden agenda. They are drawn to the person who isn't trying to get something from them but is simply content to be with themselves. That evening, Liam went not to the gym but to an art supply store. He bought a large canvas, real paints and brushes. His digital art was one thing, but he felt a pull toward something more tangible, something real. He set up the canvas in his living room, the clean white space a terrifying and exhilarating invitation. He put on music, not to fill the silence but to accompany it, and he began to paint. He had no plan, no goal, no intention of showing it to anyone. This was not for Maya, not for his boss, not for his portfolio. This was for him. He was creating for the sheer joy of creation, for the act of bringing something beautiful and meaningful from his inner world into the outer one. As he mixed colors and laid the first strokes on the canvas, a feeling of profound peace settled over him. The frantic, noisy desperation that had been his constant companion for so many years had finally gone silent. He was no longer a ghost at the feast. He was the artist, the creator, the architect of his own life. He was not invisible. He was finally, fully seeing himself. And in the quiet solitude of his apartment, surrounded by the smell of paint and the sound of his own breathing, he understood. This was it. This was the secret. This was how self-respect quietly turns you into the most attractive person in any room. You don't become the center of attention. You become the center of your own world. And that is a force more magnetic than any performance you could ever stage. The journey from there was not a straight line to enlightenment. It was a series of daily choices, a constant practice of returning to his own center. There were days when the old habits clawed their way back to the surface. He would find himself checking his phone for a message from Maya or rereading an email from his boss, searching for a hidden layer of approval. The pull of external validation was like a phantom limb. He could still feel the ache where the neediness used to be. But now he had a new tool: awareness. He could see the pattern as it arose. He could feel the familiar anxiety in his chest and recognize it not as a signal that he was doing something wrong, but as the death throes of an old, self-destructive habit. Instead of acting on the impulse, he would pause. He would take a breath. He would ask himself, "What do I need right now?" Sometimes the answer was to go for a run. Sometimes it was to work on his painting. Sometimes it was simply to sit in silence and allow the feeling to pass through him without judgment. He was learning to self-soothe, to provide for himself the comfort and reassurance he had always sought from others. He was becoming his own parent, his own protector, his own greatest champion. The project with Marcus's team was a crucible for his new philosophy. It was a high-stakes, high-visibility initiative, and the pressure was immense. The old Liam would have been a nervous wreck, working around the clock, second-guessing every decision and desperately seeking Marcus's approval at every turn. He would have lived in a state of perpetual, low-grade fear of failure. The new Liam approached it with a quiet, methodical confidence. He set clear boundaries from the start. He established a workflow that protected his creative process. He insisted on a weekly check-in meeting, but made it clear that he would not be available for constant, ad hoc interruptions. For this project to succeed, he had said in the kickoff meeting, his voice calm and steady, "I need blocks of uninterrupted time to focus. I'll be completely available during our scheduled meetings, but outside of that, please trust the process." It was a bold move, and he saw a flicker of surprise in Marcus's eyes. But because it was said from a place of professional integrity, not arrogance, it was met with respect. He delivered his work on time, every time. It was consistently excellent because it was the product of a focused, energized, and non-anxious mind. He didn't need to work 16-hour days because the 8 hours he did work were twice as effective. When a senior vice president tried to hijack a meeting and change the entire visual direction based on a personal whim, Liam didn't crumble. He didn't immediately agree, nor did he become defensive. He listened patiently. He validated the VP's perspective. "That's an interesting thought," he said, "and I appreciate you sharing it. The direction we've chosen is based on 3 months of market research and user testing that aligns with our primary campaign goals. A shift this significant would set our timeline back by at least 6 weeks and require a complete rebudgeting. If that's a path we want to explore, we can certainly do that, but we need to be clear about the consequences." He presented the situation not as a personal conflict, but as a series of strategic choices with clear outcomes. He removed his ego from the equation. He wasn't defending his work because it was his. He was defending the project's integrity because it was the right thing to do. The VP, faced with a calm, logical explanation rather than a flustered, emotional reaction, backed down. Marcus watched the entire exchange without saying a word, a slow smile spreading across his face. Later that day, he sent Liam a one-line email, "Well handled." Coming from Marcus, it was the highest praise. It was a recognition not just of his talent, but of his strength. It was around this time that Liam noticed a fundamental shift in how he experienced social situations. He no longer walked into a room and scanned it, trying to figure out where he fit in or who he needed to impress. He walked in and simply was. He was grounded in his own body, comfortable in his own skin. He didn't feel the frantic need to join a conversation or the awkward sting of standing alone. He could stand alone, observe the room, and feel perfectly content. He was his own company, and a strange thing happened. Because he wasn't desperately trying to enter social circles, the circles started to open up to him. People would approach him. They would ask him what he was thinking about. His quietness was no longer perceived as shyness or insecurity, it was perceived as depth. His stillness was magnetic. He had fewer but better conversations. He stopped engaging in meaningless small talk. He wasn't interested in complaining about the weather or gossiping about coworkers. He found himself asking deeper questions. What are you passionate about outside of work? What's the most interesting thing you've learned this year? He was genuinely curious about the inner worlds of other people because he had finally taken the time to explore his own. His interactions became less about performance and more about connection. One Friday evening, the team went out for drinks to celebrate a major project milestone. It was the same bar where his transformation had begun months earlier. The lighting was the same, the music was the same, but Liam was a different man. He was standing with a small group, listening to a colleague talk about her passion for rock climbing. He was completely absorbed in her story, in the light in her eyes as she described the feeling of reaching a summit. He wasn't thinking about what to say next or how he was coming across. He was just present. From across the room, he saw Maya. She was watching him. There was a look on her face he had never seen before. It wasn't the fleeting appreciation she'd shown for his work. It was something else. It was a look of genuine curiosity, of intrigue. She was looking at him the way she used to look at Marcus. He didn't puff up his chest or try to hold her gaze. He simply met her eyes, gave her a small, warm smile, and then turned his attention back to his colleague, back to the conversation he was in, back to the present moment. He was not going to abandon a real connection in front of him to chase a potential one across the room. He was honoring the person who had his attention. The message was subtle but powerful. My attention is valuable, and I give it fully to where I am right now. Later, Maya made her way through the crowd and approached his group. "Hey, Liam," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. "I just wanted to say the work you've been doing on the new initiative is incredible. Everyone is talking about it." "Thanks, Maya," he said, his smile genuine. "It's been a great team effort." He didn't downplay the compliment, but he didn't cling to it either. He shared the credit because it was true. "I was wondering," she said, hesitating for a moment, "if you'd want to get a coffee sometime. I'd love to pick your brain about your creative process." This was the moment the old Liam had dreamed of, fantasized about, and would have sold his soul for, an invitation, an expression of interest initiated by her. He could feel the ghost of his old self, the needy, desperate part of him wanting to scream, yes, when, now, tomorrow, any time. But he was no longer that person. He had a life now, a full, rich life that wasn't defined by her potential interest. He had his painting. He had a hiking trip planned with a friend for the weekend. He had a book he was halfway through that he couldn't wait to finish. His world was no longer a barren landscape waiting for her to come and plant a garden. His world was a thriving ecosystem that he had cultivated himself. "I'd like that," he said, and he meant it. "I'm a bit swamped for the next few days, but how about sometime next week? I'll check my calendar and shoot you a message." He had turned her invitation into his. He had taken control of the timeline. He wasn't clearing his schedule for her. He was seeing where she might fit into his. It wasn't a power play. It was a simple act of a person who had a life. He was communicating without arrogance that he was the prize. Not because he was better than her, but because he valued himself as a complete, whole person. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Sounds great," she said. "I'll look forward to it." As she walked away, a profound sense of peace washed over him. He wasn't excited in a frantic, anxious way. He was calm. If they had coffee, it would be nice. They would connect as two whole people. If it didn't happen, his world would not crumble. His happiness was not dependent on her. His sense of self-worth was no longer a fragile thing he placed in her hands, hoping she wouldn't drop it. It was a solid, heavy anchor that he held within himself. He looked around the crowded, noisy room. He saw people performing, people posturing, people seeking validation in 100 different, subtle ways. He saw the nervous laughter, the furtive glances, the conversations that were more about being seen than being heard, and he felt a deep, compassionate detachment from it all. He had been there, trapped in that invisible prison of needing to be liked, of needing to be approved of. Now he was free. The secret wasn't about becoming more interesting. It was about becoming more interested in yourself. It wasn't about learning clever lines or confident body language. It was about building a life that you were so genuinely in love with that the approval of others became a pleasant bonus, not a desperate necessity. It was about cultivating an inner world so rich and vibrant that you became your own source of light. You stop being a mirror, desperately reflecting the light of others, and you become a lantern, glowing from within. And that glow, that quiet, self-sufficient, and authentic energy, is the most deeply, irresistibly attractive force in the universe. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is. And in a world of noise, that quiet authenticity is the most powerful presence in any room. He finished his drink, said his goodbyes, and walked out into the cool night air. He wasn't walking away from an opportunity with Maya. He was walking toward his life. He had a canvas waiting for him, a world of his own making, and that was more exciting than any possibility the night could offer. He was content. He was whole. And he was finally completely free. This is the path I want you to walk. This journey from the frantic desire for external validation to the quiet power of internal self-respect is not a fantasy. It is a choice, and it's a choice available to you right now, in this very moment. You may see yourself in Liam's story. You may feel that familiar ache of invisibility, the sting of feeling like your kindness and your efforts are constantly overlooked. You may look at the Marcuses and Mayas in your own life and wonder what secret they possess that you don't. The secret is not a secret at all. It is a fundamental law of human energy. What you chase flees. What you need, you will repel. What you are, you will attract. For years, you have been taught to be agreeable, to be helpful, to be accommodating. You have been told that this is the path to being liked, to being loved. But there is a shadow side to this path. If you are always accommodating, you teach people that your own needs do not matter. If you are always helpful, you risk becoming a utility, valued for what you do rather than for who you are. The shift begins when you understand that your primary responsibility is to yourself. Not in a selfish way, but in a sustainable way. You cannot pour from an empty cup. For years, you have been giving away your water, hoping someone will see your thirst and offer you a drink. The path to true attraction begins when you decide to dig your own well. How do you do this? You start small, just as Liam did. You start by reclaiming your mornings. You stop giving the first moments of your day to the demands of others, to emails, to social media, to the news. You give them to yourself, to silence, to a cup of coffee you actually taste, to 5 minutes of stretching. You are sending a signal to your own subconscious. I am the first priority of my day. You then learn the sacred and terrifying power of the word no. Not a harsh, angry no, but a calm, clear, and respectful no. No, I'm not available to help with that right now. No, that timeline doesn't work for me, but here's what I can do. No, I'm not up for going out tonight. I need a quiet evening for myself. Every time you say a respectful no to something that drains you, you are saying a powerful yes to your own well-being. You are building a fence around your energy, not a wall. A fence has a gate. You can choose who and what to let in. But you are the gatekeeper. You are in control. You stop treating your time and your skills as an all-you-can-eat buffet for the world, and you start treating them like a fine dining experience. Reservations are required. The menu is set by you. The price of admission is respect. Then you must turn your focus inward. You must find something that is yours and yours alone. A passion, a hobby, a project that has absolutely no goal other than your own joy and fulfillment. It could be painting like Liam. It could be learning a language, hiking, writing, coding, playing an instrument. It doesn't matter what it is. What matters is that you are doing it for you. This is the act of building your inner world. When you have a rich inner world, you are never truly lonely. You are never bored. You stop looking for other people to be your entertainment, your distraction from the void. You become your own source of fascination. And let me tell you, a person who is fascinated with their own life is endlessly fascinating to others. They have a light in their eyes, a passion in their voice. They are not trying to get you to like them. They are excited to share a piece of their world with you. The dynamic is completely different. It shifts from please like me to this is me. That authenticity is the bedrock of real connection. You must also change your relationship with praise and criticism. You have been living on a roller coaster, soaring on a compliment, crashing on a criticism. This is because your sense of self is located outside of you. You must bring it home. When someone praises you, thank them, but do not inhale it like oxygen. Let it be a pleasant warmth, but not the fire that fuels you. Your fire is your own self-worth. When someone criticizes you, do not immediately internalize it as a verdict on your soul. Listen for any truth in it that might be useful for your growth. Discard the rest. Their criticism is often a reflection of their own world, their own insecurities, their own needs. It is data, not a definition. When you are the one who defines your worth, no one else has the power to devalue you. This is the essence of emotional strength. It is not about being unfeeling. It is about being the steady, unwavering anchor in the storm of other people's opinions and emotions. This journey will feel uncomfortable. It will feel selfish at first, especially if you have a long history of people-pleasing. You will feel a withdrawal from the drug of validation. You will feel the fear of being disliked, of being seen as difficult or arrogant. You must walk through this fear. You must understand that anyone who has a problem with you setting healthy boundaries is someone who was benefiting from you having none. Their discomfort is a sign that you are doing something right. The people who are meant to be in your life, the ones who truly respect you, will not only accept your boundaries, they will celebrate them. They will be relieved that they are interacting with a whole, authentic person, not a carefully constructed performance designed to please them. So, I ask you to begin your own experiment. For the next week, I want you to make one small choice each day that honors you. Say no to one small request that you would normally say yes to out of obligation. Set aside 30 minutes to do something purely for your own enjoyment. Leave work on time. Don't answer an email after hours. Don't explain, don't justify, don't apologize for taking care of yourself. Just do it. Watch what happens. You will not be punished. The world will not fall apart. What you will find is that the world will begin to rearrange itself around your new sense of self. It will begin to reflect the respect that you are finally, truly giving to yourself. And when you next walk into a room, I want you to try something. Don't look for anyone. Don't try to catch anyone's eye. Don't think about what you're going to say. Just walk in and focus on your own breath. Feel your feet on the floor. Feel the space you occupy. Remind yourself that you belong there not because of who might notice you, but simply because you exist. Carry your own world with you. Be your own anchor. Be your own light. Do this and you will discover the most profound secret of human connection. You won't have to seek out attraction. You won't have to chase respect. You will become a living, breathing embodiment of them. And without saying a word, you will quietly become the most powerful, the most centered, and the most undeniably attractive person in the room. The journey starts now. Take the first step. You are worth it. You have always been worth it. It is time for you to be the first one to truly believe it.